melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have John Schweitzer. John is an American basketball coach in the Philippines, and he coaches basketball in the Philippines and also back in his native Michigan. And we're going to talk about coaching basketball in two different continents and you know the things that he's learned and his journey. John, nice to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Nice to meet you, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. So Coach, you're a '93 graduate of East Lansing High School. That is a great basketball location. I know that I watched the ESPN special on Magic Johnson. I think he transferred from, oh God, what school did he end up going to?
Lansing Everett.
He went to Everett. He transferred because of the busing. But Lansing's got a long and storied basketball tradition. I know
they're in our conference, so we play them twice a year. Every year, they're still a good team.
Exactly, and I know you went to Michigan State. You coach, I believe, girls and boys at certain times at Waverly High School. And
that's correct. Yeah,
okay.
I've coached pretty much at the high school level, girls and boys at all levels, freshman, junior varsity, and varsity.
Okay. And as I said before, you're coaching overseas in the Philippines. Philippines is a crazy basketball culture. I mean, most countries, I think 90% of countries, soccer has been the favorite sport for many, many years. And basketball is catching on in Spain, Argentina, in the Balkans, in the Lithuania, Estonia. I forgot what those countries are called next to Russia. But in the Philippines, basketball has always been extremely popular. So we're gonna get in that as well. First of all, let's talk about East Lansing. We mentioned Magic. Obviously Judd Heathcote, amazing coach Tom Izzo. Let's talk about growing up in Lansing and the basketball culture that was there. We all seen Hoosiers and how crazy Indiana is about basketball. Talk about growing up in Michigan and the basketball culture there.
Yeah, I think Michigan has been a state that per capita has cranked out a lot of basketball talent over the years. Of course, you got Magic, you got Chris Webber, Steve Smith. Michigan State has always been strong with their teams, and of course, University of Michigan as well has had a lot of talent go through there. And then we export a lot of high school players to other states. So I think coaches have been smart to come in. I think Syracuse over the years has pulled a lot of players out of the Detroit area. And then other schools have just kind of pulled players out of the larger cities in Michigan. So growing up there was always good coaching. I went to the Judd Heathcote basketball camp forever as a kid. I was one of those kids that sat in the front row and, really listened to the speakers. I think that's probably where I kind of got an interest in the more detailed parts of the game. And then, as I got older, I found out that coaching was something that I would be interested in doing. So Michigan's got a lot of good coaches there. There are a lot of good coaches in our conference, in East Lansing's conference, but just throughout the state, you got good coaching, good teaching of basketball fundamentals there.
Okay, well, great. Well, in 1970, I think it was 77 or 78, Irving Magic Johnson decided to stay in Lansing and go to Michigan State rather than other schools. He could have gone anywhere. He was the number one or two prospect in the country at the time. How important was to Michigan basketball that Magic stayed in Michigan and played for Michigan State?
I think it was hugely important. Really, Michigan State has two national championships, one in that 78-79 season, and then one in the 2000 with the Flintstones. And of course, Tom Izzo was an assistant coach for Judd Heathcote for a long time.
That's right.
Before he became the head coach at Michigan State. So Magic staying, pretty much arguably launched, Michigan State's basketball program into another level. And then you had the whole I believe that game in Utah, I think it was out in Utah, the Magic Johnson Larry Bird final was the most watched, per household share college basketball game in history. And so that rivalry going on to the NBA, the Lakers Celtics being on different coasts, really, I think helped make basketball popular. So every time you watch the Lakers, they talk about Michigan State and Magic Johnson there. So I think that was a really big thing. Of course, as a kid, I went to the Dr. Tucker Magic Johnson basketball camp every summer and saw a lot of guys there, and just was able to hear Magic speak. And so actually, the guy I coach with now is a childhood friend of mine. I met him or got to know him well at that camp, the Dr. Tucker Magic Johnson basketball camp. His name is Ray Mitchell. So he's the head coach at East Lansing right now. And so I've created a lot of connections through that, just through kind of Magic's influence on the basketball culture in the Lansing area and in Michigan as a whole.
Yeah, how have Judd Heathcote and Tom Izzo influenced your coaching? When I coached basketball for many years. I coached my high school's summer league, which is a big deal. Not a big deal in terms of prestige, but summer league basketball was always a big deal in Northern Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area. But also I coach AAU, and Izzo, when I used to coach, I used to try to teach man-to-man defense, the physical, use your chest, your lower body. Like Izzo, I'm not sure if they still even coach it that way anymore because the game has changed and their officiating is different now. But how has Heathcote and Izzo influenced your coaching?
Yeah, I think Izzo especially is a guy that a lot of, I think, coaches in mid-Michigan area have tried to kind of pattern their formula after what he's been successful with. I think if I was to kind of compare it to something down there, Tony Bennett runs a little bit of a similar style. And so, Judd ran a zone defense, not all the time, but in large part, but that had a lot of man-to-man principles to it. And then Izzo's kind of taken those same principles and just applied it to man-to-man defense. We try to basically, our philosophy is keep the ball out of the lane and then don't gamble, contest the perimeter shots, be, early help position so that you can, prevent the high percentage shots and then kind of contest everything on the perimeter. And then at the other end of the floor, we want to take care of the basketball, similar to Michigan State. I know they struggle with that at times, but I think that's what kind of changes when MSU makes those runs at the end of the season. They really start playing well. I think it's because their offensive execution is really rounded into form. And so the defense and the rebounding and the toughness is always there. And at East Lansing, I think that, I'd like to say that those are staples of what we've done and been successful with in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Well, how about University of Michigan? So obviously they're probably rivals. You probably didn't always love them, but I'm sure a formative part of your basketball life was a Fab Five, Steve Fisher's Fab Five, and Chris Webber and Jalen Rose, and that amazing team. I'm going to freeze on the other three, but anyway, I'm sure that had an effect on your at least on your love for the game and maybe even your coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Juwan Howard, who's the coach there now, and then Jimmy King and Ray Jackson. I think the other two guys.
Juwan Howard.
yeah, Juwan Howard, who's there now, has really done a great job kind of connecting that. I think for a while because of the, which was. Arguably, you could say that there should have been no penalties in a way, because I've been somebody who's been a proponent of NIL forever. And I think that was one of the things that Chris Webber was just kind of pushing for all the way back then. Of course, the rules were, they broke rules. And so I think there was a time when Michigan didn't really want to kind of, trumpet that connection with the Fab Five. But absolutely, they've done a 30 for 30 on the Fab Five. They're a huge part of college basketball history and just made it more exciting, and at the time, Michigan State had Steve Smith was around for a couple of those years. They had a guy, Mike Poplawski, Matt Staginga, They had some good players. One of their current assistant coaches, Mark Montgomery, played against the Fab Five a couple times, and then we had a backcourt: Eric Snow, Sean Ruspert. They called him Fire and Ice at the time. Eric Snow played in the league for a while. Ruspert is still around. I think he's employed by the NBA. Not sure about that. But yeah, so MSU was great to watch those battles with Michigan, the Fab Five. They embraced the sort of villain role, and they went right through to playing Duke in the finals there. So that was exciting for me. And I would think I was in high school, right? Those two to 4 years watching them play. I remember seeing Chris Webber play in high school and just knew that, it was Chris Webber and Magic Johnson. I'm sure some older guys will have some different names, but for me, those were the two players in the history of Michigan that were probably the most talented guys to come out of there.
One of the coaches I think is a basketball genius, had incredible success at Richmond, was in West Virginia, I believe, was Steve Beilein. I think that's his
John
name.
Beilein.
I'm sorry, John Beilein.
Yeah.
So John Beilein was there. I think he had mixed results there, but the guy was basketball genius. Coaching at a big school is more than just X and O's, and it's about recruiting. There's a lot of assets. There's a lot of facets to being a successful Division I coach. But did you follow Beilein, and what did you think about him as a coach?
Absolutely. So Ray Mitchell, who I mentioned before, he and I would go down to University of Michigan to try to pick up, because as you said, basketball, a big part of it is recruiting. And maybe Beilein didn't have the charisma, outside looking in, that maybe draws some of the young players in there. But you can't argue with his player development. They made it to the finals one year.
That's right. Yeah.
I think they lost to Louisville maybe that year. And he made runs with West Virginia and other runs with Michigan. And so we would go down there to try to look at his player development program. And they just did a great job. They can develop shooting technique well. They work well with their big guys. And he kind of had a more modern brand where the big guys are away from the basket a little bit more, and they need to be able to handle the ball and pass and shoot it out there. So absolutely, I respect John Beilein a lot, and he's one guy that we try to, coaches steal from other coaches, right? I mean, that's what we do. You look at what works for them and you try to apply it to what you do. And if it fits, great. And so definitely with his player development, that's something that we took a close look at.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to your playing career, but let's also get back to Lansing. In a 30 for 30 special about Bird and Magic, they talked about the race relations that were very much part of Magic Johnson's formative years in Lansing. What were the race relations like when you were there? My guess is most of the players you played with and against were probably black players. So what was Lansing like when you played?
Yeah, Lansing has always been integrated. As far as I can tell, I grew up pretty much in the 1980s. I remember going over I lived in East Lansing, but I sort of lived on what you might describe as like the other side of the tracks within East Lansing. And I lived close to the east side of Lansing. So, as a kid, you go around, there's no, texting people or getting on a group chat or so you just got on your bike, you jammed your ball in the bike frame there, and you just rode around looking for a game with your friends. And so we found ourselves playing in Lansing, a few courts there quite a bit. There was also a school there, Home Street School, where there was a coach, Coach Cavazos, was sort of a local legend in terms of his work with young players. And so most of those players were from Lansing, and a lot of them were black. And so that's just kind of what I was comfortable with, or what I knew at a young age, was kind of playing with those guys. And of course, all throughout Lansing, there's good basketball, not just in the primarily black schools, but the schools that are mixed or even the white schools. As I said, I think that goes to the coaching. And there's never really, as far as I know, been a history of, this school won't play against that school. So there's been a respect, in a way from the primarily black schools and the white schools as well. So So I think Lansing, and I think that even kind of shows in the population. You have a lot of mixed marriages, or with biracial kids. We've always had that for decades. And so yeah, it's just been something that we all were comfortable with all along. I think you had a lot of white kids that idolized Magic Johnson, and so I think that kind of goes a long way in terms of the race relations.
Yeah. I know you're in a big town, so it's not exactly the Hoosiers, but does Michigan have the Midwest basketball culture now? Now I've talked to guys, coaches from Indiana. I've talked to Jeff Jones, coach at UVA from Kentucky. He was on the border near Evansville. Yeah, Evansville. And West Virginia it's not Midwest, but it has a deep and storied basketball culture. A lot of it because the schools were so small. Many of the schools didn't have football teams, so basketball was everything there. But Iowa and Illinois, we've all seen Hoot Dreams. Does Michigan have that small town basketball culture that the other Midwestern states have?
It does. I would be lying if I said that most of the talent isn't in Detroit and now Grand Rapids, Lansing, Flint, Saginaw, some of the larger population areas. But they do have some of that small town, Hoosier feel. If you go to some of these other schools, you'll see, a lot of respect in their gyms, for basketball and the culture that has built. And I think a big chunk of that goes to coaching. That you've had a lot of successful coaches, so people like success, and they're going to root for the teams that have been good. But you probably, I think that because of Michigan football, that people would say Michigan is a football state overall. Mm-hmm. And maybe just because of that anchor, you've got such a storied program there that's had so much success. But there is a element of the small town basketball feel here, and yeah, absolutely, it can't be ignored for sure.
And do all areas of the state play basketball? Obviously, Detroit's going to be, and all the college towns will be the place where the most of the talent comes from. But like in the Upper Peninsula, whatever they call that, on the Western Shore of Lake Michigan, does the whole state play basketball in Michigan?
Absolutely. Tom Izzo is from Iron Mountain, which is in the Upper Peninsula. Mm-hmm. And so, we have in basketball, we have 4 levels. We have Division 1, 2, 3, 4, Division 1 being the largest. So in some of the smaller areas, they compete. What you'll see in the finals quite often is sort of like a private school in Division 3 and 4 that has just a smaller student population, going against a school that, and those schools tend to be from the bigger cities where they just have smaller student populations, so they're in Division 3 or 4. But then oftentimes in the finals or semifinals, they're going against a school from a small town like an Iron Mountain or another school from the northern part of Michigan. And so those are really interesting matchups to watch because I always go every year, whether East Lansing gets close to the finals or not. They play the semifinals and finals in the Breslin Center in East Lansing, which is basically a stone's throw from my house. So I go there every year to watch that. It's always a good time. I actually didn't go last year because I was already here in the Philippines at that point. But yeah, that's a great thing to watch. Those Division 3 and 4, and then the Division 1. Usually you've got some really talented players in those games. So absolutely, it's fun to watch those matchups, and you get some of that. There's a spotlight on those small town teams, and their fans will come. Seems like the whole town is there to see those games and come out and support them.
So in Michigan, the private schools compete against the public schools in postseason. In Virginia, it's different. And you probably haven't seen a lot of my high school podcasts that I do, but one of the things that Virginia State playoffs are terrible because we have 6 classes, which is too many. We need 3 maybe. And then we have the private and public. So our state champion is so watered down. Oftentimes, the best teams like the best team in the state is John Marshall at Richmond. They have a reality TV show, but they have all these inner city kids from New York and Richmond to come in. They play against the farmers kids. But it sounds like in Michigan, at least everyone plays together according to school size.
Yes, they do. The only schools that don't qualify are these kind of the academies or the I guess the prep schools that want to play sort of a national schedule. So those teams will pop up every once in a while. Like Amani Bates played for one of those teams that was just kind of essentially a school that arguably was created for him to go out and play and get these games on ESPN. And so the MHSAA, which is the governing organization of the high school sports, they don't allow those teams. And I would, in a lot of ways, the MHSAA is a little bit conservative and a little bit behind the times, but I think that they got that part right, where you're not allowed to have these loaded teams compete. So everyone's got a chance in the postseason. And like I said, it creates a lot of interesting matchups.
Yeah, it sounds great. So Aaron tells me our good friend Aaron Katz tells me you're a really good high school player, but you went to Michigan State, and obviously you have to be another level to play there. Did you consider going to a small school where you could play college basketball, or did you want to go to Michigan State, or was it just a practical matter? Your parents, it's close by, it's cheap. You're going to Michigan State.
It was kind of a combination of all the above. I mean, I loved basketball. I wasn't really athletically gifted. I even grew after high school, like an inch or two. So no, I really wasn't kind of a college prospect at any point. And now, there's a little more recruiting. The net is cast a little bit wider. These small schools put a little bit more into pulling in, players for sports. And so maybe at the time, if that was the same as it is now, I might have had some options to play at like a Division III or something like that. But no, I loved Michigan State. That's where I wanted to go to school. And so, I really just didn't have like a lot of college options available to me. So that's kind of what I did, and didn't think twice about it.
Yeah. So as a student at Michigan State, did you continue your basketball education? Did you have your eyes on coaching even though you weren't playing?
I did, actually. There was Aaron. It's funny, we're talking about Aaron. He enrolled in a class, basketball coaching class that was taught by Tom Izzo, although I don't think he was there very often. He had somebody else there, teaching in large part. Michigan State has always had a program for graduate assistant coaches. It's been very successful. I can't name the guys right off the top of my head that have been there. I think Brian Gregory is one who's I think he's the coach currently at South Florida. And so that's been a really successful program. I think they've usually had a grad assistant teaching that class. But I would just tag along to the class occasionally because I wasn't enrolled in it, but they would invite them to go to watch a practice or things like that. And so again, something that Aaron and I kind of connected on. And I'll write about them was, I don't know how well you know Aaron, but he's a big basketball fan now, right?
Too well. Too well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he enjoys playing it, staying in shape and through that. And so that basketball coaching class was something that I was definitely interested in, and I was already coaching a little bit. I coached a church team for my first year out of high school. I coached a church team and in the church league, and that's sort of where I fell in love with it. Just kind of seeing that there's a strategy behind it that can pay off, and there's a little bit of a chess match that I enjoyed. Again, chess is something that Aaron and I have played against each other, and so I enjoy that part of it. I also enjoy the motivation and the preparation that goes into it. So I'm big on practice. I think practices are really important. And again, through Michigan State and watching them, if you attend a practice, they'll have a pile of practice plans, or you can probably pretty easily get your hands on one and just see how organized and detailed it is. They're really down to the minute. They don't waste any time. It's really a focused practice plan. So I learned a lot, just picked up a lot, and I'm not like they know me at all, but, just kind of seeing them and being in close proximity, and then just being a fan of the program. Absolutely. I've been able to kind of take a lot from Michigan State. As I said, coaches steal from other coaches. And I think and what I would hope is that if someone saw my teams play and they were familiar with Michigan State at all, they would, see some resemblance between the two.
Yeah. So I know you ended up at the public schools and coaching, I believe at Waverly. So how'd you get into full-time coaching?
Yeah. So I actually tried out to be a manager at Michigan State, and I didn't get that position. And then I was pretty disappointed at the time about that, because I thought that was going to help my, make connections with other people through that program. But from there, a friend of mine who's a professor at Eastern Michigan University, he had some connections at Waverly High School. And Waverly at the time had this guy, Phil Odlum, who's in the Michigan Basketball Hall of Fame now. And he had coached Marcus Taylor, who was at one point the number one player in the country in high school. He played at Michigan State. Yeah, his sophomore year, he led the Big Ten in scoring and assists. And then a lot of people would say he came out too early. He came out after his sophomore year, and then didn't have a great or much of a pro career at all. Or didn't really stick in the NBA, I guess is what I'm saying. But anyway, so they had just won a state championship, and I landed there. They were really nice enough to kind of let me get my feet wet. As I said, I had a bit of experience prior to that. I had coached for 1 year with another guy named Jerry Ernst, who, as I tell people here, one of his star players was a Phil Am kid who ended up playing in the Philippines Basketball Association here. He might have been a league MVP 1 year even. His name's Eric Mink. But anyway, so then at Waverly, I just started as an assistant coach, and I just kept grinding there and learning a lot. The coach there, Phil Odlum, and then his assistant coach, Ed Dutcher, they were influential. I mean, they held some positions in the Basketball Coaches Association of Michigan. And that group hosted a clinic every year. So I got to kind of, through that, meet a lot of coaches nationally, and just kind of have some informal conversations with them, pick their minds about coaching, and get some kind of off the record type of stuff that I've also has been things that have helped me as a coach. And so I spent a number of years at Waverly, and was just kind of given, as an assistant coach, more and more responsibility as I stayed there. And then when they retired, I helped another coach there, assisted him for 9 years, a guy, Craig Fields. And so Waverly really is will always be near and dear to my heart. And then I went back there after leaving for a year. For 1 year, I coached with a guy, a name you will probably know, or some of your listeners out that way, is Carlton Valentine. He played for Morgan Wooten at DeMatha High School.
Oh yeah,
and then,
yeah.
Then he went on to play at Michigan State, and so he stayed here. He met his wife, at Michigan State, I believe, and then they had two sons. One is Denzel Valentine, who played for the Chicago Bulls for a while. He's playing in Australia now for the Sydney Kings, I believe. I just saw his Instagram, some Instagram info. And then his other son, I coached for one season at Waverly High School when he was a freshman. He played varsity basketball as a freshman. His name's Drew Valentine. He's now the coach at Loyola Chicago University. And he was an assistant coach when they made that run to the Final Four. And I believe when he was hired, the head coach, and I forget where the head coach moved on to, but then when Drew got hired, I know at the time he was the youngest coach in Division I basketball at the time. and I'm not sure he still is, but he's a future star of the coaching ranks. One other guy that I was fortunate to coach at Waverly, came through Waverly when I was an assistant there, is assistant coach at University of Toledo now. His name's Justin Ingram. He's another guy who's going to be a future star as a coach, I believe.
So I want to get back to your coaching, but real quickly about the Big Ten. Just about the Big Ten. How do you feel about all the changes that have happened in the Big Ten? Like, for example, when Maryland left the ACC, I grew up in suburban DC, and University of Maryland is so part of ACC history. The league has never been the same when Maryland left. I mean, the rivalry they had with UVA, but with Duke and everyone, and the crowds were terrible in terms of they were just razz the other team and the coaches. But it was so part of the culture. And then they went to the Big Ten, and it really changed the ACC. I'm sure you've had changes just as big to the Big Ten, and the changes are happening every day. I can't even tell you who's in which conference now. How do you feel about the changes that have happened? Do you like the Big Ten of your youth better, or have you adjusted to the realities of present day college sports?
I think it's mostly what you said at the end there. I've kind of adjusted. I did like the 18 game schedule. There's 10 teams. Everyone plays each other twice. There's no imbalanced schedule. So you could say, well, that team didn't play this team twice, or they only played that team on the road, or they got that team at home. So it's been, the scheduling has been part of, I think you have to say, part of who has won the Big Ten over the past 5 or 10 years, at least. The addition of Maryland was huge, I believe, and I know what the Big Ten is doing. They're just trying to expand their footprint. They've got the Big Ten network. And so now you're getting viewers in other larger areas of the country. But, Maryland, I grew up watching ESPN and those games, and you'd see the ACC games. And of course, Len Bias, a guy I even wore my socks high. I don't know if you remember a guy named Walt Williams who wore his socks up kind of high. He was
Wizard.
a player.
The Wizard. Yeah.
Yep. Love that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I like it, and I'm interested to see with the West Coast teams coming in, what that's going to be like, USC, UCLA. And then I think they've Washington and Oregon have now agreed to come in as well. So that'll be interesting to see how, if who expands their recruiting to more of a national level. If teams can start to pull players more from the West Coast into the Midwest and vice versa. So it's interesting. I mean, as a fan, of course, it holds my interest, but yeah, I did grow up, back in the day and age when it was just the 10 teams, and you played everybody twice, and that was fun to watch, and it was there was a nostalgia, I guess, that I still have for that time of the league.
Yeah, the Big Ten and also the Ivy were unique because they had no conference tournament, so the regular season was everything. Those games they meant the world, and that was the Big Ten saying. ACC was unique because it was the first conference to have a tournament, and then Big Ten was one of the last in the Ivy. So getting back to your coaching, I know you coach girls and boys. What's the difference? What do you prefer? And in Virginia, where I am, there are a lot of very successful men who coach women in their whole career, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of interchange. Once you start coaching the girls' game, you stay there, and vice versa. But you've done both. So how'd you do both, and which do you prefer?
Yeah. So again, I didn't have the playing background, and I think there's a trend now to hire former players, and you could get players who played at higher levels. I think that athletic directors really find that appealing. So for me, moving to the girls' side was initially just a way to get started as a head coach. So when I was at Waverly, the freshman girls' job opened up there, and that was really my first high school coaching position. And then I stuck with that. At the time, the girls played in the fall and the boys played in the winter. So you could coach both. So I stayed as an assistant coach with the boys, and I was able to coach with the girls as well. But then that changed shortly after I stopped coaching. I think maybe the there was a lawsuit by volleyball, I believe, that wanted to switch volleyball to the fall, and then that forced basketball, because you got the same athletes that are going to play both, so that forced basketball to move to the winter time as a winter sport. And so that was initially a way to get my feet wet and then stay with the boys. And then at one point I had to make a decision. And so when I went back to coaching girls, it was because I was able to take the girls varsity position at Waverly. They had a really talented player at the time, Alicia Smith, who played for Penn State and Michigan State. So it was a really good job. And it was a chance to go back to Waverly, where I had a lot of connections, knew a lot of people, a lot of good people there. So to answer your question about what are the differences, I get that question a lot, and I want to say, there's not a big difference. It's, the baskets are 10 feet high, the court is the same, 3-point line, all that is the same. The rules, of course, all the same. What I did find was that girls basketball, they're a little bit more coachable. And I can speculate as to why that is. Maybe there's not as much, they don't play as much when they're not being coached, so it's always organized basketball. It's not, they don't grow up necessarily just playing pickup ball and that being a big chunk of their experience. So they're used to being coached, while they're playing or as players. Even to the point, where they're going to execute, they're going to really try to do what you're asking them to do what they've been practicing. They're not going to freelance or get away from your plays as much. That's kind of like the biggest difference, I would say, is that they're extremely coachable players. And on the other side of it, there's, of course, less athleticism, right? And so the game is moving a little bit more slowly. There's not as many at the rim or above the rim plays being made. And then as a result of that, I would say you players aren't able on their own to create offense quite as much. So you really do have to have a little bit more player and ball movement in order to get a good shot at that end of the court. You can't just, pick and roll, ISO, two-man game. I think there's a lot less of that in the girls' game than in the boys' game.
Has the girls' game evolved similar to how the boys' game has evolved, and also the men's game? The positionless, the game spread out. The pick and roll. We never screened on the ball when I played. That we space was at a premium. The basketball game is so different than when I played. Has the girls' game evolved similar to the boys, or has it evolved differently?
I think it has evolved as well. I think a big chunk of that is the, shooting. There was a time, maybe in the 80s where, only one or two players were kind of given the green light to shoot 3-point shots, right? I mean, you'd be the shooting specialist.
Every team had one shooter. That was it.
Yeah, one shooter, right? And then you play two post players, right? And you try to pound the ball inside. They've really spaced the floor. I think it's great for basketball because now you don't have to be 7 foot tall or whatever to dominate the game. It opens a lot of what the shooting has done is opened a lot of driving lanes, and I think, that's something that not a lot of people have talked about always. You see a lot of these guards have dominated now the games, and able to get to the basket and score well. A John Morant is a real problem, at the NBA level, because he's, really difficult to stay in front of. So if you get a girl like that in the girls' game, you can really take advantage of that in this day and age. And then you surround that player with some shooters. And now I think what the bigger players, the post players, you kind of instead of a shooting specialist, I think what you often see on the floor is like a low post defensive specialist, just the one player who can check, who can guard on the low block and take some space in the lane. So yeah, I think the girls' game has evolved in a lot of those ways, similar to the men's game. And you might even, I think there'd be people who would say that maybe the women's game had it first a little bit, because as you said, the game was a little bit, you had to kind of spread the floor in girls basketball and get that player and ball movement to get a shot, kind of like the European style. which here in the Philippines, we just had the FIBA World Cup here. And so a lot of people, really focused on the style of play, and those European teams did incredibly well.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking about the game has changed. A guy like James Harden would always be a great player, but he's not the fastest guy in the world. But the way the game is played today, he's almost impossible to stop because with his long arms and his ability to shoot, he can get anywhere he wants to on the floor, and you can't stop him. And the way the game is now, he's just made for today's game. So let's talk about how did you get to the Philippines? We mentioned earlier. The Philippines it's a crazy basketball culture, which most Americans probably don't know. It's one of the oldest pro leagues in the world. Most countries did not have an official pro league because there was a way out of being professional in those days. They would have like these amateur leagues where they paid players in different ways. What word am I looking for? But anyway, the Philippines had a pro league, I think in 1975, one of the earliest.
Yeah.
So they had this basketball culture. How did you end up in the Philippines?
Well, the seed for my idea of coaching overseas was planted at a NABC Nike clinic for coaches, National Association of Basketball Coaches. They put on this Nike clinic every year. It's a great clinic. I mean, if you're a coach, I would recommend going at least once. And I saw Ernie Kent speak there, and he was the coach at the University of Oregon at the time. I think he's an analyst for the Pac-12, Pac-10 now. And he talked about going over to Saudi Arabia, I believe it was, to coach there. And he just said, he tried to put something on his resume to separate him from the other coaches. And so that thought had stuck in my head for a long time. I knew that, as a guy without an extensive playing career, that I might have to do something at some point to get something on my resume that would at least, spark a question from the interview, that I'd have something different that they could, hold on to and say, well, that's unique. So that was probably back in like the early 2000s when I saw him speak and heard that. So I'd thought about that for a long time. And then fast forward to 2019 was the first time I came over here. And I knew that, kind of just through some research that the Philippines, like you said, is basketball crazed country. And it's been everything that, I had heard it was. I mean, you see basketball everywhere here. Guys on their breaks, from work will just go outside where there's like a basketball hoop there and just play 15, 20 minutes. You see basketball hoops everywhere, makeshift baskets, everything like that. It's an every man's game, so whether you're 5'5" or 6'5", you're out here playing basketball. And then the other part of that was that I knew they spoke English so that they wouldn't have that big language barrier, which now that I'm here has been a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be. But, I'm able to speak. What players are some of the players I'm coaching right now are from a province called Bulacan. And they understand everything I'm saying, but they're a little hesitant to reply in English sometimes. At least some of them are. But there's no major language barrier there. So that was the other chunk of my reasoning for wanting to come over here. And then as well, my girlfriend, my fiance now, lives here. So I came over in 2019, and what I didn't know was that I was sending out emails trying to make connections. And what I didn't know was that they don't really use email here, which a lot of people have laughed about, after I tell them that story. A lot of Filipinos have said, yeah, no, it's all Facebook, it's just kind of the way to connect with people and to communicate. And so I've been doing that pre-pandemic, sending out emails with very little response. So then fast forward to just this past April, I sent out an email, and just like I had been a little batch of emails, And I got a reply from a school called Ateneo de Manila University. And I don't know how much you know about the college game here, but Ateneo has been one of the powerhouses, for just a long time. And so I was fortunate that they replied to my email. One of their assistant coaches, got in touch with me, and I said, "Hey, I'd just love to come and observe a practice." And their coach is a guy named Tab Baldwin. He's well known here. I mean, even the basketball casuals here know who Tab Baldwin is. And so I guess what I would call him is the most accomplished and yet least well known American coach, at least well known in the United States, but most accomplished in the world. If you check out his Wikipedia page, he took New Zealand to the World Championships, what they call the World Cup now. It took them to the semifinals in 2002, I believe. I think that was the year U.S. finished like 7th or something like that. And he's just a fantastic coach, especially in terms of motion offense. He really coaches the reads well and that type of thing. So going to their practice was just, was almost like exactly what I wanted when I was trying to make these connections. And so just talking to their coaches and getting to know them, first day I was there, I didn't say much. And then, we just kind of, the conversation went along. And so then eventually Coach Baldwin gave me asked me, hey, do you want to coach here in the Philippines? And I said, yeah, I would like that, if the position is right. And so through some connections with him, I got this job with this Bulacan Taipan's team. It's in the, Manny Pacquiao. I don't know how much you know about him. He's
the Mexican business guy. Yeah.
No, a Filipino boxer. The boxer.
Oh, that's right. Pacquiao.
Yeah, the Pacquiao Mayweather, right? So he's a huge basketball fan. So he has founded a league called the MPBL, and they're sort of now a competitor, I guess, with the PBA. But the PBA is still better, but the MPBL is national, and their teams are geographically based rather than just through sponsorship. So they're connected to local areas, and which I think is a brilliant idea. So now you've got that kind of geographical loyalty to a team, and they've got teams all throughout the archipelago. So anyway, so now I'm coaching I was the first full-blooded foreign coach to coach in the MPBL. That lasted for 3 games just because I had to return to the United States, to take care of some things. I wasn't certain I would get a job there, so I wasn't really prepared to be here for the long haul. And then so that team had to kind of move on, but they had the same ownership, and so then they gave me this job coaching this MPBL juniors team. And if I could compare that to something in the United States, I think eventually it will be like the EYBL, where you have all the top talent in the country, playing each other in one league. And I think that this is the inaugural year of that, the MPBL juniors or junior MPBL. And so I'm fortunate to have this job with this. The ownership is great. A guy named Joe Bentai. I've heard he's a Filipino billionaire here. He's a huge basketball guy. There's a lot of support from businessmen, who played as a kid and they want to buy teams. And so they got that competitive spirit and that support of basketball in them. You see that a lot, in terms of the ownership of teams. And so anyway, so I got the recommendation through Ateneo, through Tab Baldwin. And so I'm just kind of got my foot in the door right now, just starting my way up the ladder, hopefully, of coaching here. And so I guess I'm sort of forgetting exactly what your question was, but
I probably didn't even have one. Just real quick, is basketball more popular than soccer in the Philippines?
Way more popular, even though I would say they're built to play soccer. I guess part of it mostly is that you don't have the space for a big soccer field.
Yeah.
Whereas you can kind of put a half court hoop in anywhere. So all of the neighborhoods, what's called barangays here will have a basketball court, and it's just an area where the whole community comes out. I mean, the games in these neighborhoods, because they'll have kind of games within the neighborhood, where smaller teams are playing each other, and then they'll have games where the neighborhoods play against each other. And it's crazy. You'll get, in the upper hundreds to even, four figures, people just kind of cramming into these small court areas. And it's exciting. It's really just shows, if you haven't gone to that and you come here and you want to observe Filipino basketball, I think that's a must to just go see some barangay games.
Yeah. So we'll get back to basketball, but the Philippines generally they love America. I mean, I guess it was a protectorate or a territory for a long time, but MacArthur, I shall return. We have a connection with the Philippines, but then I know they had a dictator. I don't want to get you in trouble here, but I know the political situation in the Philippines was a little bit challenging for a little bit. What is the relationship between the Philippines and Americans now?
They love American culture. That's one thing I can say without, getting into the politics of it. They love American culture. Their most recent president has sort of furthered or tried to strengthen the political connection between the United States and the Philippines. So I think that's a positive. But they love American culture. They love basketball. And so they also you get a lot of, like the junior MPBL has an anthem, and I mean, it's hip hop, it's hip hop done by Filipino guys. So they love our music. They love our movies. They love our food to some degree. And so in that way, for me, it's been easy to kind of integrate here as well. There's not like a lot of, I really miss this or that. If I want a hamburger, I can easily go out and get one, or a milkshake, or what have you, or see American movies very easily. So yeah, they embrace our culture. There's a lot of respect for Americans. They don't really hold a grudge against us for anything like that. Matter of fact, I think, some people will look at it like, because Japan had occupied the Philippines during the Second World War, and so we helped kind of free them from that. So no, there's no hard feelings there. And like I said, they seem to love Americans. If for nothing else, it helps them. They want to have a conversation and practice their English with you. So no, it's been great. Everyone, I mean, I tell everyone, you got to visit the Philippines. The people are so nice, so warm, so welcoming. Just a really great place to visit at the very least. And like I said, I'm living here for now. It's been about 7 months this year that I've been here. So I love it.
Yeah. So when they don't speak English, they speak Spanish or a native language.
They speak Tagalog or Filipino. So it's interesting that you asked that, because it is, the more Tagalog I learn, the more I realize that it's like there's a lot of Spanish words that are just taken, or even if they're not spelled the same, they sound the same, or just a little bit different sounding. And so I wish I could give you some good examples of that right off the top of my head. But so anyway, it's the more I learn. Well, actually, I don't know if you know any Spanish, but how are you is como está, and then in Tagalog it's kumusta. So my accent is probably bad in both languages there, but if you were a native Spanish speaker, I think you would find that you would probably pick up the language here pretty quickly.
Yeah. Do Filipinos consider themselves Asian? I mean, it might be a dumb question, but it's something I don't even know.
Yeah, it's a Southeast Asian country. So like recently they competed in the Southeast Asian Games. They won the gold medal, and that was, the gold medal game was against Indonesia. So you've got, Philippines, Indonesia, I think Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore. So everything in there is considered Southeast Asia.
Okay, but it's also, I guess, oceanic, like Samoa and they don't have any a bond with those countries, those island countries at all. It's mostly Asian where their roots are?
Yeah, mostly. Because I think that they there's I mean, really, the Philippines has developed on its own in
Right.
large part, I believe, through history until the Spanish came there. Recently, you see there's a lot of Chinese, Filipinos here, and then there are a lot of like even Americans who are like ex-GI or their families, who have been here, stayed here. I'd say that those are the most connected countries to the Philippines. But culturally, I mean, it's all its own. It's unique. I think it's developed for, centuries and maybe millennia on its own. So the people have a lot of traditions. I'm trying to, still learn more of those things. But yeah, it's a very unique and country that kind of developed in its own way.
Kind of like Hawaii in that regard. Hawaiians are kind of they were so isolated. They kind of developed their own culture and their own way of doing
Yes,
things for many years. And also an American protectorate for many years.
Yeah.
Just to get back, so the thing I always loved about soccer, and I came to soccer late in my life. My son was a soccer player, not basketball. Was that every country had a different interpretation of playing soccer? Like, for example, the Brazilians had the attacking backs. The English was more athletic, more muscular style of soccer. Germans is kind of similar. French have the athletic midfielders. The Dutch, the passing game that influenced the Spanish way of playing. So every country has a different interpretation of soccer. Central America, very physical type of soccer. Basketball, the same thing developed, except for basketball was so heavily influenced by America. Everything came from America first. But the Spanish, the Argentinians, the Soviet satellite countries, the Balkan countries, they all developed a different way of playing basketball, and that all eventually influenced the way Americans played basketball as well. Do the Filipinos have their own way of playing? Are there things that you see in the Philippines that are very unique in basketball?
Yeah, they have a few things. I would say largely it's kind of resembles the NBA. And I think that's where they kind of look at the NBA as the elite league. And so they look at that and try to emulate that style. However, you don't have the athleticism for sure or the skill level. So I would say if there's one thing that they could change a little bit, and this is really, I'm trying to bring this in my own way here, is to play a little bit of the European style, what they call more of a system-based, basketball. But I would say that they do. There's a lot of like, get the ball to your best player, run some high ball screen or some side ball screen, and just kind of let them go. It's a lot of up and down. They're looking to inbound that ball and push it up the court as fast as they can, kind of like the Lakers of the 80s, would just get that ball in and go. And so it's exciting, but I think that there's some room to grow in that respect, and in some ways that they could kind of maybe take advantage of the type of player that they're putting on the court a little bit more, by changing the style a little bit. But no, yeah, it's kind of based on the NBA quite a bit.
That's
in
interesting.
The old NBA.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting because the NBA did not have a profound effect on the way basketball is played to some degree because the NBA rules were so different because of the illegal defensive rules and stuff. So we love the NBA. We love watching Bird against Magic, but the game was so unique because of the way of the rules that it didn't have a heavy influence on the way the college teams play. Even though they emulated maybe the one-on-one moves and stuff, the game was so different because of the rules. So you're saying in the Philippines, it more evolved from the NBA game when they do plays for particular players, and they had they had defenses and offenses that were formulated around the illegal defensive rules.
Yeah, but they do play according to the FIBA rules. So I would say that was largely on the offensive end. I would say another area where the Philippines has some growth is probably at the defensive end. What you see, and the coaching at the higher levels here is good. It's really good. those coaches, they know what they're doing. I'd say where they lack a little bit, which is kind of like soccer in the United States, is at the lower levels, at the really the youth and the introductory levels to basketball. A lot of those coaches are just kind of playing 2-3 zone. So I think there's a time when those players aren't learning to play the fundamentals of man-to-man defense soon enough, and then there's some carryover from that to the upper levels, to the competitive high school and the college, and then even into their pro game. So that's one area where I think that they can get better. Like I said, it's similar to soccer in the United States, where you got someone's dad just coaching the team, and they don't know a whole ton about it, or don't have the experience or coaching background. So that's where I think they can definitely get better. But like I said, it's FIBA rules, so that's quite a bit different. That's something that's been challenging for me. I'm getting to learn. I can give you an example of a big difference, is that timeouts. You can't, in the United States, if you possess the basketball, whether it's a live ball or whenever, you call timeout, right? And in FIBA, you can't, if the ball is live, you can't call a timeout. So after a made basket or any sort of violation or whistle, you can get your timeout. So recently we were coaching a game, and we were, this is a time when you would or wouldn't call a timeout. A big difference is you're up by a point, and you're shooting the second of 2 free throws with, let's say under 5 seconds left. In the United States, you would just make that free throw, right, knowing that if you miss, the other team will call their timeout as soon as they rebound the ball. But if you make that free throw here, what you've done is given them a chance to call a timeout, which they otherwise wouldn't have, and then the ball moves to half court, right? So they can call a timeout, set up a sideline inbound play, and get a shot to tie or win. Whereas if you miss that free throw, you're up 1. They can't call a timeout. Now they just got to get that ball, go full length of the court, and try to get the best shot that they can. So there's some things that are different, and strategically, I'm really still picking that up. And I think that there won't be a ton of those things, but there are some minor things that you got to know in terms of the rules that are a little bit of a difference. One other thing, while we're talking about the rules, if I was going to change something in the United States, a rule to make us a better team on the international stage, I would change the basket interference rule. I would make that the international way, because if you look at it, so many kids are trying to dunk the basketball these days, right? They're just jumping up and grabbing the rim, and they're doing whatever they can to try to dunk. And I'm not sure that was quite the same in the 1980s. You got guys who could dunk, but then not everyone else was just trying to jump and touch the net or the backboard or whatever it was, like kids are doing now. And so I think if our players were able to either take that ball out of the cylinder or dunk it in from a young age, they would develop the timing for that, and kind of the idea in their head to just react and go do it because they know that's legal. But because it's illegal, they're not thinking about that. And so I think that our at the rim or above the rim athletes, if they were raised with that rule change, it would be a huge advantage, I think, in international basketball for the USA team.
Yeah, I always felt like if I was allowed to interfere the basket, I would have been a much better player as well. That really held me back. Well, what is the relationship with coaches with the players and parents? And is it the same as in America? Is the coach some of the Asian cultures and teachers are looked at as kind of they're almost like worshipped, I think. So how about in the Philippines? How is a coach viewed by players and parents?
Yeah, I think as you said, there is some of that. There's a higher level of respect. I think in the United States, it's the level of respect has gone down. You get a lot of parents who just think they because they've seen their child play over the years, that they know exactly what they're talking about. And I think that everyone wants what's best for their child. I get that, but here I think there's a little bit more trust and a little bit more respect for the coaches and teachers. And then I think for me, there is even at least as, for now, until I show them otherwise. There's even respect as a foreign coach, as an American coach, that adds another layer of that. So yeah, there's definitely from all around, I think, some respect for coaches. Even I go to get some coffee here. They give you a card that's it's called a GAB card. But anyway, it gets, for national coaches and athletes, you get a discount on food. So I'll go into a coffee shop, maybe there's a particular chain that I won't say their name, but that's here in the building where I live, and they call me coach when they give me my order. So there's just a lot of respect from people, and then especially for basketball coaches as well. There's almost like a little bit in awe of that. So so yeah, that's nice.
Do you think coaching in the Philippines will make you a better coach in America, technically and also, socially, all the things a coach does? You think in your development as a coach, it'll make you a better coach?
I do. I really do. And I had to consider that, because I'm giving up something by coming here. And so I'm hoping that there's a big benefit to that. But I can already tell that through all the little challenges that there are, including language, and then what they don't know has been something that's helped open my eyes about what's really important. What are the things that you want to teach? You only have a limited amount of time in practices. So you've got to prioritize. And so, yeah, in a lot of ways, and then just coaching through the FIBA rules. Michigan, I don't know about Virginia. Michigan doesn't have a shot clock in high school basketball right now.
Yeah, either does Virginia. No, we don't.
Okay.
Either. I think there's like 6 states left that don't have it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're behind the times in that regard. So we do have a shot clock here. So I think that is something that would be hugely beneficial for me. Just there's a lot of ways, the way you're coaching defense, knowing that shot clock puts a limit on what the other team can do. In Michigan, especially in girls basketball, teams will go into their stall offense, with like, a 7-point lead and 5 minutes left in the game, which is just ridiculous. And so I think I'll be a little bit ahead of the curve, when I'm going back and they finally do install shot clock rules in Michigan and then throughout high school basketball in the United States. Or if I was able to, progress to the college level, I'd be ready for that in that regard. So that, and then as well, like coaching the players, like I said, the communication, is a little bit more of a challenge. There's even the way you speak to the officials, that I've actually tried to, because the game is officiated a little bit different here in terms of what they allow or what they don't allow. So as somebody who's maybe spoken to the officials a little too much through my time, and not in a disrespectful way, really, but just kind of, in my own way, I'm questioning calls here and there. And I've learned to just kind of roll with it. You don't think that, anyone's out to get anyone else, in terms of officiating. So through the course of a game, you just hope it all evens out, that there's not a big call that goes against you down the stretch. So yeah, there's been a lot of ways that I think that I've progressed as a coach already, grown in certain ways as a coach.
And the quality of the officiating, is it on the level of America? Or I remember when I used to watch the international game, like when the NBA players would play, they would travel, and the foreign refs would call it because it was a travel, and the NBA players like, "Come on, man, do you know I'm Clyde Drexler? That's not a travel." But I think those days are over. I think probably basketball is an international game now, so we're not surprised as much as we used to be. But anyway, the level of officiating in the Philippines is strong.
You're going to get me in trouble with this question. It's different. I think that I have a newfound respect for officials in the United States, maybe is a good way to put it. I'll specifically talk about traveling is not, I think in FIBA and the NBA, it's just been a little bit opened up. The travel call is not as tight as you see in high school basketball or college in the United States. So that's one that I've learned to just kind of let go a little bit. A lot of players, you don't see a lot of jump stops upon receiving the ball. So players are just kind of walking right into their catch, which is often, if they're not doing that in a real responsible way, they're going to travel. So I just kind of let a lot of that go in terms of the officiating. But no, I think it's improving. I think that you've got a smaller number of officials that I see officiating a lot of games who are good. Every once in a while you get a guy who's maybe not as good. But it's improving like the rest of the game here. I think they're getting better, and there's a desire to get better. And even that goes from like the league commissioner that I see in the NPBL. The guy's doing a great job. They're trying to shore up everything. They're trying to improve everything, in terms of even just the product, the presentation. And so the officiating is part of that. And I know that they're serious about them making all aspects of the game better.
Yeah. What about the progression for Filipino players? Like in America, traditionally, we went from high school players, maybe some AAU, to college, and then the pros. I think you mentioned there's almost like semi-pro leagues that are tied to the NBA now, that so players can go if they don't want to go to college. But still, college is a stepping stone to our pro. And in soccer, for example, in Europe, players go to academies, and college is not necessarily part of the progression. But what about in the Philippines for basketball? Is college? I know they have a NCAA there. They call it the NCAA, I believe. Is college part of the progression, or do the best players go to academies and look to go pro?
College is part of the progression. They have the NCAA, and then they have something else called the UAAP, which is, I believe, just 8 schools. And if in my opinion, those are the best players at the university college level in that UAAP. It's just like a conference, essentially one conference. And they're all the schools are located in this Metro Manila area. And they attract the vast majority of the talent that comes to those 8 schools. And it's even within that, it's kind of top heavy. I'd say that there are probably like 3 or 4 schools that are really just kind of competing for that title every year. And then you have a lot of NCAA schools, and then you have some. So it's broken up quite a bit by league, and they don't really have. I think if there was one big addition that they could, to help grow the sport here, they could have something like March Madness, like a 64 team, or even I guess March Madness is up to 68 teams even right now, right? So I would bump that even up to 128, if anyone's asking me. But they should. I think the Philippines could have a really great big tournament, and they would find the appeal of that underdog team making that run. They would see how exciting that is. You don't really see that as much here. You could kind of rattle off on one hand in both the PBA and the UAAP, the number of teams that are going to have a chance to win the championship every year. So I think that's one way they could grow the game. They could get more eyeballs on a one tournament, one setting. Would be to have like a postseason tournament, like be the main draw that involved more than just kind of a limited number of teams. But yeah, college is a progression. It is a stepping stone. There are a lot of leagues here in both in all high school, college, and pro levels. And so I think that as maybe in the future for the sport, they could kind of consolidate some of that or create connections between those leagues and those conferences. And that would be helpful. I would say a lot of recruiting is done through connections. There's just a lot of like loyalty and a lot of trust in this coach or that coach. So if you're not at the elite schools, you get players that, through your coaching connections. I see a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned the Asian games, and the NBA we consider the world championship, but the way, like for example, soccer works, they have a Champions League where the domestic leaders of a league of a country, they play against the leaders of other countries in a separate league, which runs concurrently with the next year's schedule. And I know in basketball they have the EuroBasket. I believe it's called EuroBasket, And it's a similar thing where they have like almost like a Champions League in Europe of the best clubs all over. And it's very prestigious to play in these leagues. I've talked to a few players. Do they have that in Asia as well? Do they have like a Champions League where the best clubs in the Philippines can play against the other best clubs in Asia?
Um, I believe they do, but I don't believe that it's like, like the Champions League in football. I call it football, right? I mean,
It's fine.
It's more you play with your feet and there's an actual ball. Anyway, I had to debate that with football, American football people, but that is larger, right, than the just winning the league. For instance, like the English league, a lot of teams would say, oh, we aspire to win the Champions League over that. So it's certainly not the tournament or tournaments that they have are smaller in nature, and I think they're through invite and not necessarily qualification. And so they'll play teams from Japan or whatever, but it's kind of like a touring thing where they go and they'll just play a few games against teams, and it's not like what people are playing for throughout the season to kind of qualify for that. So again, that's another area where it could grow. I'm not sure that they would need a big sponsorship or some sort of TV deal. I think that would be able to launch that. But yeah, again, that's another way that the game could grow here for sure.
Yeah, because like in soccer, in football, they have the Club World Cup, and it would be great if Ronaldo is able to take a Saudi team, to win the Asian Champions League and get to the Club World Cup and to play against the European. They would get crushed, I'm sure, but it would be, it would be interesting. So I know you're are you still planning to coach in America and Philippines for a while? Or are you full-time Philippines now?
No, I'm planning to go. I'll go back. Our season at East Lansing starts the second Monday in November. I'm very excited about it. We've made it to the quarterfinals, the two of the past 3 years. We had a couple years where COVID really hurt us. 1 year we were in the quarterfinal, and I think I had COVID, so I couldn't coach in that game. And then I think probably we had 2 starters, and then a chunk of our bench was out for that game. And I don't care who's listening. I'll say this: I know we would have won that game and moved on to the semifinals. And then another year we had a young team. This was the first year of COVID, and they just ended up canceling the tournament. And we were really good that year. I think we would have made a nice run. So I'm excited about our upcoming season. We've got a couple young guys that are the sons of former Michigan State players. One kid is named Cameron Hudson. He's a really outstanding young wing. And another guy, KJ Torbert, is son of a guy who was a high school legend here, and he had some injuries at Michigan State, but he still had a very successful career there. And then we got another young wing, Jace Branson, who's the most athletic kid I think I've ever coached at the high school level. So we're excited. We got a big guy in the middle, a senior, Christian Dunn, a 6'7" kid who can play. He's got some offers and some looks. So I think we're going to be. This is, you got to understand that Ray and I have known each other since we were kids, and now we're coaching at our alma mater together. And so, in a way, this is a real kind of dream come true. Where we've he's done a fantastic job building this program, and I think we're reaching close to the mountaintop where we've had our eyes on these goals for a while. So yeah, I'll be back in the United States coaching. Very excited about it. I'm looking forward to having a strong season.
So this year you're the boys varsity coach at Waverly. Is that what you're doing?
I'm the assistant coach. So Ray Mitchell is the head coach there. Like I said, I was a girls coach at the varsity girls coach at Waverly, and I quit that job to come over. He asked me, said, I'd love it if you'd come back and coach with me. And so that's where I am now.
Okay. So what are your goals now? What this would be a good place to end. If you could have a tremendous career coaching basketball in the Philippines, would that satisfy for you and your career goals, or do you want to use your experience in the Philippines to further your career here? Where do you see yourself 5 or 10 years from now?
It's an interesting question, and I'm open to all possibilities. I will say that coaching in the MPBL was a great experience. It was brief, but I really enjoyed coaching professionals, and I think that if that opportunity arises again, I would love to take that. So I aspire to maybe coach at the highest level that I can. There have been times, where I wasn't sure what level I would get to, but I think that this has now opened more doors for me. Hopefully I can advance here. And like I said, I'm just at the bottom of the ladder at the moment. I've got my foot in the door, and I'm hoping to move up to bigger and better jobs. But I also am very optimistic, and I see a lot of potential for the NPBL specifically. I think in 5 to 10 years from now, it could be the dominant league here. There's a lot of politics in basketball, but I think Manny Pacquiao's got a huge vested interest in making this work. He's got a pretty decent bank account, and so he's supporting this thing to the fullest, and so getting in with that, and then this ownership group, they're great guys. They know what they're doing. The owner of the team where I am now, he owns a team in the NPBL, and then this team in the juniors. His name's Joe Bentai, and he's just well connected. He's been successful in everything he's done. He's hired a lot of good people in the organization. This guy, Charles Kimpo, brought me in. That's the connection through Ateneo. And so I'm happy where I am right now. It's a good bunch, good group to be working with. But absolutely, I aspire to just move on to the highest level that I could be. And I've also been sort of inspired by this guy, Tab Baldwin, and his career. He went overseas. He's coached in, like I said, New Zealand. He's coached in the Middle East, and then he was the national team coach here in Philippines for a while. And he, didn't play in the NBA or even major college basketball or anything like that. So yeah, I think at my age, I'm not a young coach anymore, but I sort of kind of feel like I've been reinvigorated by this experience. So 5 to 10 years from now, it's hard to say where I would be, but I'm happy about where I am now, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Yes, when you talk about Baldwin, I do interview a lot of coaches, and oftentimes they will talk about thought leaders or innovators that I never heard about. Coaches that may have been coaching Division II or III ball, even NAIA. That I remember one guy was talking about. I think Kevin Eastman, who was an NBA executive, but I didn't even know he invented a whole way of playing offense that a lot of the NBA teams still use today. But he was never had a high profile as a coach. But the other coaches in the Southeast knew exactly who he was. And I think, and I know there's a coach in Japan, coaches the women in Japan. I guess he went to Penn State, and he's had this great career. So there's a lot of ways you can get success in coaching. So look, John, I've enjoyed meeting you. Aaron's one of my best friends. He talks about you all the time. I'm glad we finally connected. I learned a lot about Michigan basketball and the Philippines. I've always been interested in the Philippines, but as you can tell, for blowing Manny Pacquiao, don't know as much about it as I probably should. But I think this was an incredible dialogue. I really enjoyed meeting you. Let's keep in touch. I'd like to know how your season goes this year. Real quickly, do you think, as an assistant coach, do you think you could impact the game as a head coach could? Are you going to be able to have the impact that you want back in Michigan with Ray?
Absolutely. We have it's a great coaching relationship. He trusts me a ton. I think that the strengths that he brings really match up well. We mesh. It's something that we had talked about long before it actually happened. So it's really, Ray Mitchell, great guy. I think I've said his name 3 or 4 times now. That's not unintentional. Just a good friend of mine, good guy. And his ability to develop players is fantastic. I think East Lansing was really smart to hire him. It wasn't an easy hire for them at the time. But he gives me a lot of room to coach as an assistant. We talk daily, we have one of those type of relationships where we're just on the phone quite a bit with each other. So yeah, my impact there, I'm very happy. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't stay there. You know, I wouldn't feel as though, you know, I actually have some help in affecting, you know, wins and losses through the course of the season. And you know, credit to him, we've had good success so far. So yeah, I'm absolutely happy there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, good. Well, Coach, look, best of luck. We'll keep in touch, and we'll definitely follow your success there. But look, thanks for taking so much time. It's probably what 10 o'clock in the morning, and
Yeah, we're 12-hour difference, so yeah, it's 10:43 here. So I know it's late there.
Yeah, it's getting a little bit late here, especially for us old guys. But look, I really enjoyed it. Again, great dialogue. Thanks again for spending so much time, and let's keep in touch and do this again.
Absolutely, I would love to. Maybe a year from now, it'd be interesting to kind of see what happens and what's going on.
Yeah, see where it goes.
Excellent. Yeah. Julian, thank you so much. Great to meet you.
All right, Coach, enjoyed it. Talk soon.
Take care.